Hey there YouTubers, and welcome to DidgieTalks. As part of my Living With series, I'm going to be talking about owning an electric vehicle. In my case, that's a Tesla Model S 100D, but I'll be covering general aspects of owning an EV, so please stay tuned in. The first thing I really wanted to do here was dispel some of the myths associated with having an electric vehicle. There are plenty of them. The most common seem to be that they don't have enough range, they're just souped up golf carts, that they're too expensive, that they burst into flames and therefore are unsafe, or that there simply isn't the infrastructure to support owning one today. Let's pick them off one at a time. So if you look at range of an electric vehicle today, all the models coming into the market are starting at around about 200 miles as a base level. If you look at the average annual mileage of a UK driver today, it's about 7,250 miles, which equates to about 140 miles a week. So putting those two things together, if you're one of the average drivers in the UK, you can get about a week's worth of driving easily out of a single charge of the electric vehicles on the market today. However, not everybody fits into the average category. For example, in my first 12 months, I did 17,000 miles. I can honestly say in that first 12 months of ownership, there wasn't a single point where I suffered any real range anxiety. There are a few things to consider here. So for example, when I get home, I plug the car in, and when I get up in the morning, it has as much or a little charge in it as I wish. If I'm going on a long drive, I can give it a maximum charge, but most of the time I just leave it charging to around about 60%, because that gives me plenty of range and plenty of mileage for everyday usage. So the myth about whether they have range or whether there is range anxiety, I think it is just that, a bit of a myth. It usually comes from people that don't own electric vehicles or people that are just naturally pessimistic. I'll do a whole episode on range and range anxiety, so we'll cover that at a later date. Let's look at whether or not they're just souped up golf carts. Well, for me, I think this really falls into two areas. One is around driving and performance, and the other is around practicality and usage. So in terms of driving and performance, if you didn't know already, the Tesla P100D is the fastest production car on Earth. 0 to 60, it's faster than the Bugatti Veyron, and 0 to 120 will beat a 911 Porsche. So in terms of performance, there's really not a lot that can be said against it. In terms of driving that performance, because of the way it's configured and because of the way it's set up and because of the way the power is delivered to all four wheels in my case, it's really clean, it's really linear, it's really smooth, it's also instantaneous. You know, in terms of the driving experience, you can't fault that either. Couldn't be further away from being a golf cart. And in terms of the usage and the practicalities of owning an electric vehicle, well, they're just like any other car. In fact, in my case, I have a front trunk as well as a back trunk, no engine, no differentials. I have masses of space, so space is never an issue. I fit 5 people in my car easily, very comfortably, with all the luggage you would want for a holiday. It has all the mod cons. It has air conditioning, a fantastic infotainment system. It's ultra quiet, and using it every day is just a joy. And I couldn't recommend it enough to anybody. So for those two reasons, it couldn't be further away from being a golf cart. Let's take a look at the issue around them being expensive. Well, like all new technology, it starts out quite expensive and it gets less and less the more it's mass produced. And I think we've hit that point right now where there are more cars coming onto the market. Electric vehicles have been out long enough, so there are second-hand cars on the market. So there's no denying that a top-of-the-range electric vehicle is expensive. You can't get away from the fact. But then a top-of-the-range, any vehicle tends to be expensive. So then let's start looking at what are essentially the base models for cars today, electric vehicles today. A base range Tesla Model 3 will come in at around about £38,000. Now don't get me wrong, that's still a serious chunk of change and not in the range of everybody. However, when you start turning that into lease agreements or lease purchase agreements, we're talking about that becoming less than £400 a month, £350 a month, and I've even seen lease agreements of around about £299 a month. So they are definitely getting more affordable. This will only get better as other players really come into the market. So Mercedes, Audi, they're going to be launching their cars this year, and then you've got the likes of Ford and Kia and others coming to the market over the next year or two. And these cars are just really going to bring down the price of owning an electric vehicle because they're more mass produced, there's more on the market, they'll be more competitive as a result, And let's not forget that because the cars have been around now, electric vehicles have been around now for 5, 6, 7 years, there are second-hand cars on the market which are bringing them into the price bracket of most owners. Another area worth considering around cost is the cost of running, both in terms of the servicing and in terms of the filling up the tank. So electricity works out at approximately 1/3 the cost of fuel per mile. So I did the maths on this before buying an electric car, and actually it was going to work out 1/3 less expensive per year. I was going to be putting in the tank somewhere in the region of £350 worth of diesel every single month. Whereas actually I'm currently putting in the tank probably somewhere in the region of £100 or less. So that's definitely worth taking into account if you own an electric vehicle. So another area worth taking into account is servicing. An electric vehicle doesn't have a big engine in it, which has got masses of moving parts, a sump full of oil, grease and whatnot all over the place. So I recently talked to Tesla about having my car serviced, and they actually told me there's no need to get it serviced yet. They said, don't bother bringing your car in for a service, please, sir. We don't normally take a look at them until around about 25,000 miles, but if you have any issues, feel free to bring it along and we'll take a look. How many times have you been told by your dealer not to bring the car in for a service and to save the money? Again, that's something worth considering. So in terms of them being really expensive cars to own, it really depends on what you're going to go for. If you're going to go for a top-of-the-range luxury saloon, then of course it's going to be expensive. You're going to go for a base model but high-spec and high-technology car, then they're still coming in at around about that middle bracket, which is not necessarily within everybody's reach. And if you look at what's going to be coming on the market over the next few years, then I think they'll become affordable for just about everybody. So if you don't have an electric vehicle today because you can't afford one, you probably don't have long to wait. So let's look at the issue around safety. Well, all internal combustion engines have the potential to burst into flames. So these reports we've seen of Tesla or electric vehicles bursting into flames is no different from every other car that exists on the road today. And if you actually look at the data, it would suggest that they are as safe, if not safer, than your average ICE, internal combustion engine car. Now, cars have got safer through engineering every single year, and far fewer of them burst into flames today than ever did before. But it still happens. Even then, even though it does still happen and electric vehicles are new technology, again, you look at the data, it would suggest that they are as safe, if not safer, than your average ICE car. So that is a myth, another myth. They are no less safe than any car on the road today. And let's also not forget, Tesla have been awarded the highest possible safety rating by all the governing bodies all over the world. So that's worth taking into account too. So let's look at the point around charging infrastructure. Well, I did talk about having done 17,000 miles in my car in the first 12 months. And I can honestly say over that period, I didn't suffer range anxiety once. So obviously I've got a charger at home, which meant I always have a charge once I've been home. Once I've gone to bed and woken up in the morning, I've got as much or little as I need in the tank. But the other thing that I found owning an EV is that actually there are charging stations popping up all over the place, weekly, if not daily, popping up all over the UK. Notwithstanding the fact that I have free supercharging, so when I have been on long drives, I've looked for a supercharger, I've pulled in, I've charged the car for free, and I've carried on my journey. The fact that there are so many chargers everywhere, and a lot of hotels, for example, now offer complimentary charging if you're staying over. There are destination charges at hotels and restaurants all up and down the country. Essentially, the infrastructure is significant. Okay, it's not as widespread as petrol stations. And then we're going to come to the point about charging takes longer than filling up a tank of gas. Well, I think in terms of just the general infrastructure being available, that's a myth too. I don't think you have to worry about that. So there is the question about how long it takes to charge up an EV. And I'll take you back to my point about I wake up in the morning and I have as much charge in the tank as I decided to put in the night before. So if I'm going on a long journey, I'll put in a full charge. The majority of the time I charge my car to about 60% because that's all I ever need, and I never find myself running out of electricity. But if I do need to charge up, then I need to go to a charging station. And yes, it does take longer to charge an electric vehicle than it does to fill a tank full of gas. However, If you plan your journeys properly, if you plug it in at night, you pretty much have all the energy you need to get you to your destination and back again. And if you do need to charge, you usually only need a top up. You don't need to go to a full tank every time you plug in. So in the one case where I did have a long drive, I drove to Leeds and back, I did have to stop at a supercharger, and I stopped for 15 minutes. Now that was 150 odd miles in each direction, and I just wanted to make sure I had enough to get me home. So it was a very short stint stay. Like I said, it was a 15-minute charge, and actually I fancied a break at that point. I grabbed a coffee, I took a comfort break, I got back to the car, I unplugged, and I carried on my journey. So really no issue at all. I think both in terms of infrastructure and range, when you link those things together, I can honestly say I've had no problems. Most of the issues you hear about range and infrastructure come from people that don't own electric vehicles. Now, I have a few friends who rib me all the time about whether or not I have to change batteries, and when I do have to change batteries, do I have to sit around for an hour or two while they sort themselves out? Well, the guys that give me the ribbing about that and the banter that we have usually comes from 50-somethings with their souped-up German sports cars, with their sports exhausts, making a load of noise, pumping out a load of pollution, and having to visit petrol stations all up and down the country. Well, I consider myself a really good friend, so I'm quite willing to stand by my mates who are going through their midlife crisis, albeit sometimes a little late in life. You know who you are. So anyway, I hope that video was informative. I hope it covered off some of the basic issues around the negativity and the myths associated with owning an EV. I will cover some more detailed aspects of owning an EV through my series. I hope this was useful. If it was useful, don't forget to like it. Don't forget to share it, because I'm sure this is some information that most people will benefit from knowing. And don't forget to subscribe. The more subscribers we have, the more videos I'll produce. Thanks for listening, and take care.